My name is Charlotte Bunch, and I'm the Executive Director of the Center for Women's Global Leadership here at Rutgers University. One of the issues that I'd like to speak about on this video clip is the relationship between culture and violence against women. I think that sometimes people talk about cultural forms of violence, but that it's much more useful for us to see that violence is supported by culture in every part of the world, and that what we need to change is not sort of changing culture with the big C, but changing those aspects of all of our cultures with a little c that support violence against women, just as any form of human rights changes culture to some degree, because it is about improving our lives and improving the cultural attitudes and things that support human rights abuse, in this case violence against women. So I would like to get people to think about culture not as something that's just traditional or just comes from the South or from marginalized groups, but as mainstream culture and the way in which mainstream culture in the United States and in other parts of the world supports violence against women. One of the things in the US that many of us have begun to talk about is how the gun culture in the United States exacerbates violence against women. In this country, unlike Europe, many women die from gunshots because we have a culture that supports guns. And that's a form of killing women that is often not talked about in terms of violence against women. I think that what we need to be looking at is how all forms of violence are shaped by the particularities of our lives, by our age, by our sexuality, by where we live, by the cultures that surround our lives. And all of those cultures still come out of patriarchal assumptions about the need to control women, and particularly to control women's sexuality, and to control women's movements, what women do. So women activists experience violence against women to try to stop their activism. Women who want to experience sexuality outside of the accepted norm, whether that's having an affair with somebody you're not supposed to have an affair with, that is called adultery in some countries, or whether that's lesbianism, or whether that's simply teenage sexuality, anything that is not considered appropriate in your cultural context. Violence is used to control that sexuality. So I think we need to think about culture in this broader way, as the way in which attitudes support the notion that women's bodies should be controlled and that violence is the tool for that control. And in that sense, culture is not something exotic. Culture is a part of everyday life, and culture is always changing, for the better or for the worse. So it's not a question of something to be preserved, but rather something that evolves, and how it evolves is something we, all of us, should take responsibility for. There are a number of articles and things that people have begun to talk about. We at the center have some material on our own website, which you can go to look for some discussions about culture and violence. But there's also been a report of the UN Special Rapporteur on Violence Against Women, Yakin Ertürk, in 2006 on violence and culture against women, that I think is a great resource for thinking about this question further.